My son phoned me sobbing on the morning of his gallery debut. His mother poured paint thinner over his centerpiece canvas. She left a note. "You're a delusional embarrassment. Quit now." He FaceTimed me at 5:15 a.m. Just the camera pointed down. No words. Streaks of dissolved oil paint and turpentine pooling on his studio's concrete floor. The empty metal tin was kicked into the corner like she wanted me to see exactly what she'd used. She didn't try to hide it. I spoke to him immediately. He didn't hang up, which meant he was just sitting in the fumes, waiting. His voice was hollow, not furious, not devastated, just numb in that specific way that's far worse than a panic attack. The sound of someone who's accepted their dream is dead. I told him not to touch anything. I was pulling out of my driveway before he could object. The drive down Interstate 94 took 35 minutes. I dialed the gallery owner, Marcus, first. He answered, and I explained the situation evenly. There was dead silence. Then he told me something that made my stomach drop. His mother had emailed the gallery at 3 a.m. before I even knew the canvas was ruined. She told Marcus my son was pulling out of the showcase. Severe depression, she wrote. Artist's block. She requested his wall space be given to the standby exhibitor so his absence wouldn't cause a gap. She had orchestrated the logistics to ensure his empty space had an airtight alibi. Marcus said he'd keep the spotlight rigged. We could figure something out. When I parked outside his loft, my son was on the fire escape in his paint-splattered sweatpants. He looked entirely broken. I didn't say a word about the ruined canvas. I just told him to grab his suit, wrap the destroyed painting in plastic, and get in the truck. He looked at me like I was delusional. I told him to trust me. On the ride into the West Loop, he finally confessed what he'd been holding back. 3 days prior, the Chicago Arts Endowment selected him for their $75,000 Emerging Artist Fellowship. He hadn't told his mother, hadn't breathed a word to anyone. He was guarding it. He wanted to watch her reaction when they presented the oversized check at the reception. Wanted that to be the exact moment she realized what he'd built in that freezing studio for 3 years. She had intercepted a congratulations letter the afternoon before. He didn't know why she opened it, but that was why she destroyed the canvas. It was entirely calculated. She realized her son was about to be financially independent and publicly celebrated for a career she had relentlessly mocked. If she couldn't take credit for his masterpiece, she would obliterate it. Marcus met us at the loading dock with a staple gun and a blank wooden frame. My son changed in the utility closet. We mounted the dissolving smeared canvas exactly as it was. I adjusted his tie while the VIPs started flowing in. I told him to stand next to his display and own it. He nodded and walked out. I grabbed champagne and stood near the pillar. She was by the bar. I spotted her signature yellow trench coat instantly. She was projecting perfect maternal sorrow, whispering to collectors that he wasn't showing. I caught her saying it to a local critic. "It's heartbreaking," she sighed. "He just doesn't have the mental fortitude." The exhibition officially opened. She was sipping a martini when the crowd shifted toward the back wall. She had no reason to turn around. She had already directed this tragedy. Then my son stepped under the gallery lights. He didn't shrink or scan the room for her approval. He stood next to his ruined, chaotic painting, now titled Erosion of Support. The spotlight made the raw canvas glow. She noticed the crowd staring before she saw him. I watched her freeze, watched her grip her martini glass until her knuckles went white, watched her realize the narrative had slipped through her fingers. The foundation director tapped a microphone, and this year's $75,000 fellowship recipient, my son, stepped forward. The gallery erupted. The other artists cheered loudest, followed by the critics and buyers. It wasn't polite golf claps. It was electric. He walked to the podium like he owned the entire building. She stood rigidly by the bar, completely paralyzed. Everyone around her was applauding. She was a statue. He adjusted the microphone, took a breath, and looked at the crowd. He never glanced at her once. I squeezed my glass to stop my hands from shaking. And then he started his speech. His voice was steady. It didn't tremble, not even on the first syllable. Silas leaned into the microphone, the metallic whine of feedback echoing briefly against the high exposed brick of the gallery before settling into a crisp hum. "They tell you art is about creation," Silas said, looking over the heads of the crowd, his eyes fixed on the far wall. "But sometimes it's about what survives the attempt to erase it." He didn't point at her. He didn't say her name, Margot. He didn't give her the satisfaction of being the central villain of his defining moment. He stripped her of her power entirely by making her anonymous, reducing her lifetime of calculated sabotage to a mere environmental hazard he had successfully weathered. He spoke for 3 minutes. He thanked Marcus for the wall space. He thanked the Chicago Arts Endowment for the financial independence to keep working. He called the destroyed canvas behind him a collaboration with unseen forces that tried to dissolve his vision but only ended up proving its permanence. The crowd laughed at the right moments. They thought it was a brilliant conceptual pivot, an edgy commentary on the struggle of the modern artist. Only 3 people in the room knew it was a crime scene. When the applause rolled through the gallery a second time, louder and more sustained, I finally let my eyes drift back to the bar. Margot's martini glass was empty on the counter. The yellow trench coat was gone. For a brief, naive second, I thought we had won. I thought the sheer humiliation of being outplayed in a room full of the city's cultural elite had finally forced her into a retreat. I should have known better. Margot doesn't retreat. She regroups. The rest of the reception was a blur of handshakes and flashing cameras. Silas stood by the smeared canvas, fielding questions from critics who were dissecting the violent, visceral brushstrokes of the turpentine burns. He played the part perfectly, nodding thoughtfully, offering vague, philosophical answers that let them project whatever genius they wanted onto the mess his mother had made. I stayed near the pillar, keeping the perimeter secure, watching the front door. By 9:30 p.m., the crowd began to thin out. Marcus signaled for us to meet him in the back office. Silas grabbed his oversized novelty check. He looked exhausted, the adrenaline crash hitting him hard, leaving pale shadows under his eyes. I put a hand on his shoulder as we walked down the narrow, fluorescent-lit hallway past the bathrooms. When we opened the door to Marcus's office, Marcus wasn't alone. Sitting in the leather guest chair across from Marcus's desk was Claire Strand, the foundation director who had just handed Silas the award an hour earlier. She wasn't smiling anymore. She had a manila folder resting on her lap, her hands folded neatly over it. "Silas," Claire said. Her tone had shifted. The warm, congratulatory cadence of the podium was gone, replaced by the cautious, measured voice of an administrator dealing with a liability. "We have a slight administrative issue regarding the disbursement." Silas stopped in the doorway. "Administrative issue?" I stepped into the room, closing the door behind us to block out the ambient jazz playing in the gallery. "What kind of issue, Claire?" She looked at me, then back at Silas. She opened the folder and slid a printed email across the glass surface of Marcus's desk. "We processed the actual wire transfers the night of the gala. It's standard protocol to have the funds hit the recipient's account by Monday morning. But when our finance team went to execute the transfer at 6 o'clock this evening, they found a hold on the account we have on file for you." Silas frowned, stepping forward to look at the paper. "A hold? I bank with Chase. I haven't put any holds on my account." "It's not a bank hold," Claire said quietly. "It's a dispute of standing. We received an email at 4:15 p.m. today from a Margot Voss. She identified herself as your legal financial proxy and co-signer on your primary accounts." The air in the room felt like it was instantly sucked into the air conditioning vents. I felt my jaw lock. Voss, her maiden name. She was using it to bypass the immediate association with us. "She provided documentation," Claire continued, turning over a second sheet of paper. "A medical power of attorney and a joint account agreement dated 4 years ago." "That was when I was in college," Silas said, his voice rising, the calm facade finally cracking. "I was in the hospital for appendicitis. She needed access to pay my rent while I was in surgery. I revoked that." "Did you revoke it in writing with the bank and nullify the medical proxy with the state?" Claire asked. She wasn't being cruel, just factual. Silas stared at her, the realization sinking in. He was 24. Nobody thinks to file a formal revocation of a medical proxy with the county clerk when they recover from routine surgery in college. "She claims," Claire said, reading from the email, "that you are currently experiencing a severe psychological episode. She cited the destruction of your own artwork tonight as proof of a manic state. She formally requested the endowment funds be placed in escrow under her supervision until a psychiatric evaluation can be completed, threatening to sue the foundation for gross negligence if we disperse $75,000 to an individual who is a danger to himself." I looked at Marcus. He was rubbing his temples, looking down at his desk. He knew how toxic Margot could be, but bringing legal threats to an arts foundation was a different tier of warfare. Foundations hate risk. They run on donor money and public goodwill. The mere whisper of a lawsuit regarding mental instability and misallocated funds was enough to freeze them solid. "It's a lie," I said, my voice dangerously low. "She destroyed the painting. I was there. I have photos of the studio from this morning." "I believe you," Claire said softly. "I truly do. The stunt at the bar tonight, her leaving early, I can read between the lines. But belief doesn't indemnify the endowment. As of right now, there's a legal claim asserting that Silas is not of sound mind to receive these funds, backed by a legacy power of attorney that hasn't been legally voided." "So what happens to the money?" Silas asked. The oversized check he was holding suddenly looked like a pathetic, mocking cartoon prop. "It stays in the endowment's holding account," Claire explained. "You have 30 days to provide legal proof that the power of attorney is void, along with a statement from a licensed physician clearing you of the claims she made. If you can't untangle this in 30 days, the board rules require us to pass the fellowship to the runner-up. We can't let the money sit in legal limbo indefinitely." 30 days to fight a woman who had spent 30 years perfecting the art of bureaucratic quicksand. "We'll get it sorted," I told Claire, projecting a confidence I absolutely did not feel. "First thing Monday," Claire nodded, standing up and smoothing her skirt. "I am so sorry, Silas. The committee believes in your work. Just get the paperwork clean." She walked out of the office. Marcus poured a glass of bourbon from a decanter behind his desk and pushed it toward Silas. Silas didn't touch it. He just dropped the cardboard check onto the floor. It made a hollow, depressing slapping sound against the hard wood. "I have negative $14 in my checking account," Silas whispered. "I put the last of my money into the framing and transport for tonight. I thought the wire was hitting Monday. I can float you," I said immediately. "Whatever you need." "I don't want your money, Dad," he snapped, the frustration finally boiling over. It wasn't directed at me, but I was the only target in the room. I wanted my own. I earned this. "I know you did," I said, keeping my tone steady. "And you'll get it. She's playing a weak hand. It's an intimidation tactic." Marcus cleared his throat. "There's something else." We both looked at him. "After Margot left the bar," Marcus said, looking at his computer monitor, "she made a phone call in the lobby. My front desk girl overheard it. She thought it was weird enough to write down." Marcus turned the monitor toward us. It was a digital sticky note. "Margot Voss called someone named Duncan. Said, 'The tenant at 412 is volatile. I'm pulling my name off the guarantor agreement. I strongly suggest you inspect the property tonight for chemical damage. He's burning solvents.' Duncan, Silas's landlord." Silas went pale. "The turpentine. I didn't clean it up. I just left it on the concrete when you told me to get in the truck." "When did she make that call?" I asked, looking at my watch. It was 10:15 p.m. "About 2 hours ago," Marcus said. "Grab the plastic wrap," I told Silas, moving toward the door. "We have to get back to the loft right now." We didn't speak on the drive back. The rain had started, a cold Chicago drizzle that slicked the streets and smeared the streetlights across the windshield. I pushed the truck as fast as I could without drawing a siren. Silas lived in an industrial pocket of the West Loop, an old textile warehouse that had been loosely converted into artist lofts. It wasn't zoned for heavy residential use, which meant the leases were predatory, and the landlords were perpetually looking for excuses to evict tenants and flip the units for higher-paying tech startups. I pulled up to the curb. The loading bay doors were shut, but the side entry door was propped open with a brick. We took the freight elevator to the 4th floor. The grating rattled endlessly. The moment the doors slid open, I smelled it. The heavy toxic stench of turpentine was thick in the hallway. It wasn't just coming from Silas's door, it was permeating the entire floor. We walked down the corridor. Silas's door was standing wide open. Standing in the center of the studio, looking at the massive puddle of dissolved paint and harsh chemicals pooling near the floor drains, was Duncan. He held a clipboard in one hand and a flashlight in the other, even though the overhead industrial lights were blazing. He looked up as we walked in. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely indifferent, which was infinitely worse. "Silas," Duncan said, his voice echoing off the concrete wall. "I tried calling your cell." "I was at my gallery debut," Silas said, breathing heavily, looking at the mess. "I had an accident this morning. I was coming back to clean it up. It's a severe lease violation to dump industrial solvents on an untreated concrete floor," Duncan recited, reading from his clipboard like he was reading a menu. "The fumes are entering the ventilation system. The tenant in 410 complained of a headache 2 hours ago. It was an accident, Silas repeated, stepping forward. I have industrial neutralizer under the sink. I can have this spotless in 20 minutes. I'm afraid that doesn't matter, Duncan said, flipping a page on the clipboard. I received a formal notice from your mother, Margot. She's the primary financial guarantor on this lease. She legally withdrew her backing this evening. She can't just withdraw without notice, I intervened, stepping between Duncan and my son. She can if she cites a safety violation that threatens the property, Duncan countered smoothly. Which she did. And looking at this floor, she wasn't lying. Without a guarantor, and with a documented hazardous materials violation, you're in breach of contract. Duncan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of yellow paper. He didn't hand it to Silas. He walked over to the heavy metal fire door and taped it at eye level. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises, Duncan said. If you and your equipment aren't out by Tuesday at midnight, I'm locking the doors and bringing in a hazmat crew. You'll be billed for the remediation. Duncan walked past us, his boots crunching slightly on a dried flake of paint, and disappeared down the hallway. Silas stood in the middle of his studio. 3 years of work, hundreds of sketches pinned to the drywall, canvases stacked in the corners, heavy wooden easels, crates of oil paints, welding gear for his sculptures. Moving it all in 48 hours would require a fleet of trucks and a small army. He had no money. The foundation check was frozen, and his mother had orchestrated it all without ever raising her voice. He looked at the yellow paper taped to the door. Dad, he said quietly, the word barely carrying over the hum of the warehouse refrigerator. Don't panic, I said, pulling my phone out of my pocket. We work the problem. We start boxing the small stuff tonight. Tomorrow I rent a U-Haul. We move everything to my garage. And then what? Silas asked, turning to look at me. The numb, hollow look from 5:15 a.m. was creeping back into his eyes. She froze the grant. She took the studio. I have no space to paint, no money to live, and she proved to everyone that I can't survive without her. She didn't prove anything, I said fiercely. She burned a bridge and called it a victory. She's desperate. She doesn't look desperate, Dad, Silas whispered. She looks like she's winning. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down at the screen. It was a text message from Margot. I didn't want to open it. I knew exactly what it was going to be. The calculated twist of the knife, timed perfectly to arrive the moment she knew Duncan would be leaving the building. I swiped the screen. He can move his things into the basement at my house. Dinner is at 7 on Sunday. Don't let him ruin his life over pride. I stared at the glowing text. She had engineered an absolute catastrophe, stripped him of his resources, and then positioned herself as the only available lifeboat. It was brilliant. It was sickening. I didn't hand him the phone. I just read it out loud. Every word, keeping my voice flat and devoid of the venom I was feeling. Silas didn't explode. He didn't yell. He just looked at the puddle of turpentine, then at his hands, stained with cerulean blue and titanium white. He let out a breath that sounded like a tire losing air. She wants me in the basement, he said quietly, right under her feet, where she can listen to me walk around and know I'm relying on her electricity. You're not going to the basement, I said, putting the phone back in my pocket. I didn't reply to her. Silence is the only currency Margot doesn't know how to spend. Start grabbing the brushes. Put them in the dry sink. We'll box them first. We worked until 3 a.m. The silence in the loft was heavy, broken only by the sound of packing tape ripping off the roll and the dull thud of stretcher bars being stacked against the freight elevator doors. We prioritized the finished pieces. Wrapping them in moving blankets, I scavenged from the back of my truck. Silas moved like a ghost in his own life, methodically dismantling the sanctuary he had built from nothing. By the time I dropped him off at my place in the suburbs, the sun was threatening to come up over Lake Michigan. I put him in the guest room and told him to sleep. At 8:45 a.m. on Monday, we were sitting in the lobby of a Chase Bank branch in Oak Brook. The branch manager, a guy named Fletcher with a tie that was tied too tight, sat behind his plexiglass screen, tapping at his keyboard. Silas had asked to sever the joint account and remove Margot's name. Fletcher frowned, his eyes scanning the monitor. I see the account, Silas, but I can't process a removal of a cosigner without both parties present or a notarized release form from Margot Voss. She's not going to sign a release, Silas said, leaning forward. That's why I'm here. I want to close the account entirely and open a new one in just my name. You can't close it either, Fletcher said, leaning back in his chair. There's a freeze on the account, placed yesterday evening by the secondary account holder. She cited a pending medical power of attorney review. Until that's resolved with our legal department, the funds are locked, and the account status cannot be altered. There are $14 in that account, Silas said, his voice tightening. Keep it. Just open a new checking account for me. Fletcher clicked his mouse a few times. He looked genuinely apologetic, but banking protocols don't care about apology. I can open a new account, but any direct deposits routed to your social security number, like, say, a wire transfer from an endowment, might flag our internal fraud system if there's an active medical proxy dispute attached to your profile. It's an automated risk mitigation feature. If the endowment tries to wire $75,000 to a new account while the old one is flagged for financial conservatorship, our system will likely reject the wire and send it back to the sender. Margot hadn't just frozen his money. She had salted the earth of his financial identity. She knew how the algorithms work. She knew that the mere presence of a dispute would make the bank treat Silas like a liability. We walked out into the bright Monday morning sunlight. The parking lot was full of people going about their normal, uncomplicated lives. Silas stopped by the passenger side of my truck and rested his forehead against the cool glass of the window. She boxed me in, he whispered. Every exit. Not every exit, I said, unlocking the doors. Get in. We're going to see a lawyer. I called Nora Kellner on the drive toward downtown. Nora was an estate and family law attorney I had used during my own divorce from Margot. She knew exactly what Margot was capable of, and more importantly, she wasn't intimidated by her. Nora agreed to squeeze us in at 11. Her office was a sharp, minimalist space overlooking the river. Nora listened to the entire story without interrupting once. She took notes on a yellow legal pad, her pen scratching loudly in the quiet room. When I finished explaining the situation with the endowment, the lease, and the bank, Nora set her pen down and took off her glasses. It's a textbook financial abuse strategy, Nora said, looking at Silas. She's utilizing legitimate legal mechanisms, the old medical proxy, the joint lease, the joint bank account, to create a temporary administrative chokehold. She knows she won't win in court long term. The medical proxy is outdated, and a judge would invalidate it after a single psychological evaluation proves you're sane. But she doesn't need to win long term. She just needs to stall you out. 30 days. case, Silas said. The endowment gives me 30 days to clear the proxy, or they pull the fellowship. Nora sighed. That's the pressure point. The court system is backed up. Filing a petition to formally nullify a medical proxy and get an emergency injunction against her interfering with your bank could take 6 to 8 weeks just to get on a docket. By the time a judge strikes her down, the 30 days are up, the endowment takes the money back, and you've lost your studio. She wins by default. So what do we do? I asked. We don't fight her in family court, Nora said, her eyes narrowing slightly. That's where she wants you. It's slow, it's bureaucratic, and it gives her a platform to play the concerned mother. Nora leaned forward, folding her hands on the desk. We go after the gallery. Silas blinked. Marcus didn't do anything wrong. He let me hang the ruined canvas. Marcus is running a business, Nora corrected. And right now, Margot is operating under the assumption that Marcus wants to avoid a scandal. But Marcus is also the middleman between you and the endowment. Did the gallery have an exclusivity contract for the showcase? Yes, Silas said. A standard representation clause. They take 20% of any sales, and they were the official host of the endowment presentation. Perfect, Nora said. She pulled her keyboard toward her and woke up her computer monitor. Margot poured industrial solvent on a piece of art that was contractually bound to Marcus's gallery for exhibition. She admitted to it by leaving a note, which you have a photo of. She then emailed the gallery impersonating you, or speaking on your behalf without authorization, attempting to pull the piece from the show. That is tortious interference with a business contract and destruction of commercial property. I saw where she was going. My pulse ticked up a notch. We don't sue Margot for being a terrible mother, Nora explained, typing rapidly. We threaten to subpoena Marcus and the gallery for failing to secure the artwork, and we draft a civil suit against Margot for commercial damages, but we don't file it. We send a draft of the complaint directly to her. We make it clear that if she doesn't immediately lift the bank freeze and withdraw her proxy claim with the endowment in writing by Friday, we file the suit. A civil suit for commercial damages doesn't go to family court. It goes to civil court, and it comes with a public record that will show up on every background check she ever runs for the rest of her life. Margot cared about exactly 2 things: control and her pristine social reputation. Being publicly named in a commercial lawsuit for vandalizing an art gallery would destroy the latter. Will it work? Silas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It changes the math, Nora said simply. Right now, her risk is 0. She's pressing buttons from the comfort of her living room. We need to put a price tag on her interference. I need a $5,000 retainer to draft the demand letters and start the clock. I pulled out my checkbook before Silas could even open his mouth to protest. I wrote the check and slid it across the desk. Draft it, I said. Send it by courier today. We left Nora's office, feeling the first fragile spark of hope in 48 hours. We spent the rest of Monday renting a box truck and moving the heavy equipment out of Silas's studio. Duncan stood by the freight elevator the entire time, arms crossed, making sure we didn't scratch the walls. We didn't say a word to him. We just worked until our muscles burned and the studio was nothing but an empty concrete shell smelling faintly of chemicals. By Tuesday afternoon, Silas's entire life was boxed up in my garage. He set up a temporary easel near my workbench, but he didn't paint. He just sat in a folding chair staring at the blank canvas, waiting for Friday, waiting to see if Nora's bluff would work. On Thursday morning, my phone rang. It was Nora. I put her on speakerphone in the kitchen so Silas could hear. Did she cave? I asked immediately. No, Nora said. Her voice was tight, missing the confident edge it had in her office. She didn't cave. She escalated. Silas stopped pouring his coffee. I sent the draft complaint via registered courier to her office on Tuesday, Nora explained. I gave her until tomorrow to withdraw the proxy. Instead of complying, her attorney just faxed over a response. What does it say? Silas asked, stepping closer to the phone. She's not just holding the line on the medical proxy, Nora said, hesitating for a fraction of a second. She filed an emergency petition for temporary guardianship over you, Silas. But that's not the worst part. Nora took a breath. She attached an affidavit to the petition. It's a sworn statement from Marcus, the gallery owner. The kitchen went dead silent. Marcus? I repeated, my brain refusing to process the information. Marcus hates her. He knows what she did. Apparently, she offered him something better than the truth, Nora said grimly. Marcus swore under penalty of perjury that you exhibited highly erratic, aggressive behavior during the exhibition setup. He stated that you brought the ruined canvas in yourself, claiming you destroyed it in a manic episode, and insisted on hanging it despite his objections. He told the court that he feared for his safety and the safety of his patrons, which is why he allowed it to stay up. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. Marcus had sold us out. Margot had gotten to him. Maybe she threatened to ruin his gallery's reputation among her wealthy collector friends. Maybe she just wrote him a check. It didn't matter. She had bought his testimony, effectively erasing the only independent witness to her vandalism. With the gallery owner corroborating her narrative, Nora continued quietly, a judge granted the emergency temporary guardianship this morning. Silas, legally, as of 9 a.m. today, your mother has full control over your finances, your medical decisions, and your legal representation. Silas dropped his coffee mug. It shattered against the tile floor, sending hot black liquid splashing against the cabinets. She controls his legal representation? I asked, a cold dread washing over me. Yes, Nora said, which means I just received an email from her attorney. As Silas's legal guardian, Margot Voss has officially terminated my services on his behalf. I am no longer legally allowed to represent him. If I continue to advise you, she will report me to the state bar for ethics violations. I stared at the phone screen until it went black. The silence in the kitchen felt heavier than the concrete studio we had just emptied. Silas was still looking at the spilled coffee dripping down the oak cabinets. He didn't move to grab a towel. He just looked at it like it was the final piece of evidence against him. She owns me, he said. The numbness was completely gone now. It was replaced by a hollow, terrifying panic. Dad, she owns me. If I try to access my own money, it's fraud. If I try to hire another lawyer, she can block it. She can legally commit me to an inpatient facility if she claims I'm having an episode. She won't, I said, grabbing a roll of paper towels. Temporary guardianships are scrutinized. If she overreaches, she already overreached, Silas shouted, his voice cracking. He grabbed his hair, pacing the short length of the kitchen. She bought my gallery owner. She lied to a judge. She knows exactly where the lines are, and she's sprinting past them because she knows we can't afford to keep up. He was right. I knelt down and started wiping up the coffee. The bitter smell of the dark roast mixed with the lingering scent of the turpentine that seemed permanently attached to our clothes now. My phone vibrated again. This time it was a text, not to me, to Silas's phone, which was sitting on the island. He stopped pacing. He stared at it. I stood up, tossing the wet paper towels into the sink, and walked over. Margot, a medical transport will be at your father's house at 3:00 p.m. You have an intake evaluation with Dr. Halverson. Pack a bag for 72 hours. If you resist, I will have the police escort you under a wellness check. It was 11:15 a.m. We had less than 4 hours. She's trying to manufacture the paper trail, I said, my heart slamming against my ribs. If you go, this doctor, who I guarantee is on her payroll or in her social circle, will write a report saying you need observation. That turns a temporary guardianship into a permanent conservatorship. So I just leave? Silas asked, his eyes wide. I go on the run? I'm a 24-year-old artist, Dad, not a fugitive. If I run, I prove her point. I look erratic. I look paranoid. You don't run, I said, grabbing my keys off the counter. You stay here. You don't answer the door. You don't answer your phone. Let her send the transport. Let her send the cops if she wants to. We need leverage, and we need it right now. I'm going to the gallery. To do what? Silas asked, panic rising in his voice. Punch Marcus? He'll press charges, and she'll use that against me, too. I'm not going to talk to Marcus, I said. I'm going to talk to the girl who caught Margot on the phone. I made the drive back into the city in record time. The West Loop was bustling with the lunchtime crowd, people in expensive coats holding overpriced salads. I parked in a loading zone 3 blocks from the gallery and walked the rest of the way. The gallery was open. The bell above the door chimed lightly as I walked in. The space felt different in the daylight, sterile. The ruined canvas was gone. The back wall where Silas had stood 2 nights ago was completely bare, painted a fresh, pristine white. Sitting behind the curved reception desk was the front desk girl. I remembered her face from the reception. Young, tired eyes, probably a grad student working for minimum wage, and a resume line. Her nameplate read Dana. She looked up as I approached. Her polite retail smile faltered instantly when she recognized me. She glanced nervously toward the frosted glass door of Marcus's back office. He's not here, Dana said quickly, keeping her voice low. Marcus is at lunch with a client. He won't be back until 2. I'm not here for Marcus, I said, leaning on the high counter. I'm here for you. Dana swallowed hard. Look, I can't talk to you. Marcus was very clear this morning. He said if you or your son come in here, I'm supposed to ask you to leave. If you don't, I have to call building security. Dana, I said, keeping my tone perfectly steady, not threatening, just urgent. My son is currently sitting in my house waiting for a medical transport to force him into a psychiatric hole because of an affidavit your boss signed this morning. Her eyes widened slightly. She looked down at her keyboard. Marcus swore under oath that Silas brought a ruined painting in here and acted violently. I continued softly. But you and I both know that's not true. You told Marcus about the phone call you overheard Margot make. You heard her tell Silas's landlord she was pulling her guarantee because of chemical damage. That happened after the painting was destroyed, because she destroyed it. Dana picked up a pen and started clicking it rapidly. I need this job. I'm finishing my master's in curatorial studies at the Art Institute. A letter of recommendation from Marcus is the only way I get a fellowship next year. Marcus lied to a judge, I said. He committed perjury. If this goes to a real investigation, his gallery is going to be radioactive. His recommendation won't mean anything. You don't understand, Dana whispered, leaning forward slightly. She didn't just pay him off. It wasn't a bribe. I frowned. What was it? It was a threat, Dana said, her voice barely a breath. I was doing inventory in the stockroom yesterday afternoon when she came in. She didn't know I was there. She had a folder. She told Marcus she had the original provenance records for the Ashby collection he sold last year. The Ashby collection. It was a massive sale that had put Marcus's gallery on the map. It was a collection of mid-century abstract expressionist pieces. What about the provenance? I asked. They were forged, Dana said, looking me dead in the eye. Not the paintings, the import documents. Marcus bought them from a dealer in Europe who didn't have the legal right to export them. They're technically stolen cultural property. Margot found out. She told him if he didn't sign the affidavit saying your son was unstable, she would anonymously mail the proof to the FBI art crime team. Marcus would lose everything. Federal prison, asset forfeiture, all of it. Margot had weaponized a federal crime to control a 24-year-old's bank account. The sheer scale of her malice was staggering. She didn't just find a weak link. She found a nuclear button and put her thumb right on it. Do you have proof? I asked. Did she leave the folder? Dana shook her head. No, she took it with her. But Marcus was terrified. He drank half a bottle of scotch after she left. Then he called his lawyer and asked how to draft an affidavit for a guardianship hearing. I rubbed my face. Knowing the truth didn't help Silas. A grad student's hearsay about a conversation she eavesdropped on wasn't going to stop a judge or a medical transport team. I needed hard leverage. Where are the Ashby paintings now? I asked. Dispersed, Dana said. Sold to private collectors in New York and London. The gallery just kept the digital records of the transactions. Can you access those records? Dana recoiled, dropping the pen. No, absolutely not. That's a massive breach of protocol. If Marcus finds out I dug into his secure files, Dana, if you don't get me something to prove Margot is extorting him, my son loses his entire life at 3 o'clock today. He loses his money, his career, his basic civil rights. She will lock him in a ward. She stared at me. The conflict in her face was agonizing to watch. She was a kid, just trying to start her career, suddenly caught in the crossfire of a deeply toxic family war. I can't get into the secure server, she said finally, her voice trembling. But Marcus prints everything. He's old school. He keeps physical ledgers of all high-value transactions in a locked firebox in the storage room. If you want proof of the Ashby import discrepancy, it's in there. Where's the key? On his key ring, she said, which is in his pocket. At lunch, I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 12:45 p.m. I had 2 hours before the medical transport arrived at my house. Where does he eat lunch with clients? I asked. Usually the Mercer, Dana said. It's 2 blocks down. I thanked her, turned, and walked out the door. The air outside felt colder now, the wind picking up off the lake. I didn't know what I was going to do. I couldn't exactly walk into a high-end steakhouse, mug Marcus for his keys, and run back to the gallery, but I had to break the extortion loop. I walked into the Mercer. It was loud, filled with the clinking of heavy silverware and the low murmur of expensive conversation. I spotted Marcus in a corner booth. He was sitting across from an older man in a tailored suit. Marcus looked terrible. His skin was sallow, and he was sweating through the collar of his shirt. I didn't approach the table. I sat at the bar, ordered a club soda, and watched him. I needed him alone. 20 minutes later, the older man shook Marcus's hand, dropped a black Amex on the leather folio, and stood up to leave. Marcus stayed in the booth, staring into his empty rock rocks glass. I got off the stool and slid into the booth across from him. Marcus jumped, his hand knocking against the glass. When he saw it was me, the blood completely drained from his face. "You can't be here!" Marcus hissed, glancing around the restaurant frantically. "I have a restraining order pending against Silas. It covers you, too." "It's not filed yet," I said calmly, resting my forearms on the heavy oak table. "And we both know why you signed that affidavit." Marcus froze. "I don't know what you're talking about. Silas was out of control." "Stop it, Marcus. Dana heard the conversation. I know about the Ashby collection. I know the export papers were forged, and Margot threatened to call the feds." He slumped back against the leather booth like someone had cut his strings. He rubbed his eyes with the palms of his hands. "She's a monster. You were married to her. You know what she is. She walked in there and basically told me to hand over your son or go to prison. And you chose my son. I chose my life." Marcus fired back, keeping his voice low but sharp. "I built that gallery from nothing. I'm not going to federal prison because I bought some canvas from a sketchy broker in Geneva. I'm sorry about Silas, I really am, but I can't throw myself on the grenade." "You don't have to," I said. "You just have to recant the affidavit. Tell the judge you were coerced. If I do that, she leaks the folder." "She doesn't have the folder," I bluffed. I had no idea if it was true, but Margot rarely held physical evidence if she could avoid the liability. She preferred digital leverage. "She's playing you. She's using you to get guardianship, and once she has it, she'll keep blackmailing you for free art or a cut of your sales. You think she stops here? She owns you now, Marcus." I could see the realization hitting him. He knew I was right. Margot never let a useful asset go. "What do you want me to do?" he whispered. "I want the key to the firebox," I said. "I want the Ashby ledgers. I'll take them. If she tries to report you, the evidence is gone. You can claim she made it up to pressure you. That's tampering with evidence," Marcus said, wiping his forehead with a napkin. "If she calls the FBI anyway, then you play dumb. But right now, you're the one holding the loaded gun to my son's head. At 3 o'clock, a medical transport is showing up to take him away." Marcus stared at the table for a long time. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy ring of keys. He detached a small brass key and slid it across the table under a coaster. "Third shelf in the storage room," Marcus said softly. "It's a gray Sentry safe. The ledgers are in a blue binder. Take them. But I'm not going to the courthouse for you. I'm staying out of it." I took the key. "I'll handle the courthouse." I practically sprinted back to the gallery. Dana looked up, startled, as I pushed past the reception desk and went straight into the back room. I found the gray safe, slid the key in, and turned it. It clicked open. The blue binder was right there. I grabbed it, shoved it into my jacket, and locked the safe again. I walked back out to the front desk. "Thank you, Dana." I was in my truck, speeding back to the suburbs by 1:45 p.m. I called Silas. He picked up on the first ring. "Did you get something?" he asked, his voice tight with anxiety. "I got Marcus's leverage," I said, weaving through traffic on I-290. "I have the proof of what she used to blackmail him. I'm coming home right now." "Dad," Silas said, and the tone of his voice made my foot ease off the gas. It wasn't anxious anymore. It was completely flat. "What is it?" "She didn't wait until 3, Silas said. Through the phone, I could hear a heavy, rhythmic pounding in the background. It was the sound of a fist hitting a solid wood door. "I'm looking out the window," Silas continued, his voice terrifyingly calm. "It's not a medical transport. It's 2 police officers, and she's standing right behind them." "Don't open the door," I told him, pressing the accelerator to the floor. "Do not engage with them. I'm turning onto our street right now." I threw my truck into park behind the black and white cruiser idling in my driveway. I didn't bother turning off the ignition. I grabbed the blue binder off the passenger seat and got out. They were on my front porch. 2 patrol officers, one heavy set with a gray mustache, the other young and visibly bored. And standing behind them, clutching a leather handbag to her chest like a shield, was Margot. She looked perfectly distressed. Her hair was immaculate. "Officers!" I called out, walking up the driveway. "I'm the homeowner." The older cop turned, resting his hand casually on his belt. Not his weapon, just his radio, but the posture was clear. "Sir, we're here on a wellness check and to execute an emergency medical transport order for a Silas Voss." "He's my son," I said, stopping at the base of the porch steps. I kept my voice incredibly calm, pitching it an octave lower than normal. "He's 24 years old, he's perfectly healthy, and he's inside because his mother is currently attempting to weaponize the family court system against him." Margot let out a breathless, practiced gasp. "He's not well. Please, officers, I have the judge's order. He's a danger to himself. He destroyed his own studio." "Ma'am, we just need to lay eyes on him," the younger cop said, turning back to the door. I looked at Margot. I didn't yell. I didn't point. I just held up the blue binder. "I just came from the West Loop, Margot," I said. My voice was loud enough for the cops to hear, but the context meant absolutely nothing to them. "I had a very long lunch with Marcus. He was remarkably forthcoming about the Ashby collection. He even gave me the keys to his safe." Margot's eyes snapped to the binder in my hand. For the first time in 30 years, I saw her perfectly calibrated expression completely shatter. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The blood drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking stark and hollow under the porch light. "He's very upset about the affidavit," I continued, taking one step up the stairs. "He feels terrible about the perjury. He said you left him no choice, but he's decided he'd rather take his chances with the provenance records than let you destroy his gallery. He gave me the ledgers." The older cop looked back and forth between us. "Sir, I don't know anything about a gallery. We have a court order signed by a judge." "I know you do," I said respectfully to the officer, "but the petitioner is about to withdraw it." I didn't take my eyes off Margot. "Isn't that right? You're going to tell the officers there's been a misunderstanding. Because if they put my son in the back of a medical transport, my very next stop is the local FBI field office to hand over this binder to the art crime team, and you know exactly what's inside it." It was a game of chicken, played out on a concrete slab in the suburbs. Margot stared at the binder. She was doing the math. The medical transport was supposed to be her checkmate. She hadn't accounted for Marcus breaking. She hadn't accounted for physical evidence leaving the gallery. If I handed that binder over, she wouldn't just lose Silas. She'd be indicted for federal extortion. The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. The younger cop shifted his weight, looking annoyed. Margot swallowed hard. Her throat clicked. She turned to the older officer, her voice shaking. Not with fake distress this time, but with absolute, barely contained rage. I apologize, officer," she forced out. "My ex-husband is right. I jumped to conclusions. Silas's primary care doctor just paged me before you arrived. He's going to do an outpatient evaluation tomorrow instead. You can cancel the transport." The older cop let out a heavy sigh, the kind that comes from a man who has responded to 100 bitter domestic domestic disputes and hates every single one of them. Ma'am, you filed an emergency petition, he said gruffly. You can't just call us out here and change your mind because your ex showed up. I'm his legal guardian, Margot snapped, the veneer of the helpless mother vanishing entirely. And I am instructing you to stand down. I will amend the petition with the judge. The cops didn't argue. They didn't care enough to argue. They just wanted to clear the call. The older one muttered something into his radio, shook his head at me, and walked down the steps. They got into their cruiser and backed out of the driveway without another word. Margot and I were left alone on the porch. The engine of my truck was still humming behind her. She didn't look at the binder anymore. She looked directly into my eyes, and the hatred there was cold and absolute. You think you won, she whispered. I know I did, I said. Now get off my property. I still have the guardianship, she said, her voice dropping to a low, venomous hiss. I still control his accounts. I control the endowment. You bought him an afternoon. That's all. You can't use that binder without destroying Marcus, and Marcus is your only witness to the gallery incident. If you burn Marcus, you have no proof I vandalized the studio. You're trapped. She was sharp, terrifyingly sharp. She had already calculated the exact limitations of my leverage in the span of 30 seconds. Get off my property, I repeated, my voice dropping. Before I decide, I don't care about Marcus at all. She tightened the strap of her handbag, turned on her heel, and walked to her pristine white Lexus parked on the curb. She drove away without looking back. I waited until the taillights disappeared around the corner before I let out the breath I felt like I'd been holding since I left the city. My hands were shaking. I unlocked the front door and walked inside. Silas was sitting on the floor in the hallway, his back pressed against the wall, his knees pulled up to his chest. He looked like he was going to throw up. They're gone, I said, tossing the blue binder onto the entryway table. It landed with a heavy thud. She called them off. Silas let his head fall back against the drywall. How? I showed her the binder. I told her Marcus flipped. She couldn't risk the exposure. He looked at the blue spine of the ledger. Is it over? No, I said honestly. I wasn't going to lie to him. She still has the paper from the judge. She still has the bank freeze. She just can't physically take you right now. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I drank it in one go. My mind was racing. Margot was right about the paradox of the leverage. If I gave the binder to the FBI, Marcus goes down, and Marcus takes his affidavit to the grave to protect himself, which means Silas never clears his name with the endowment. If I don't give the binder to the FBI, Margot retains the temporary guardianship and bleeds Silas dry. We needed a third option. We needed a way to break the guardianship without relying on Marcus's testimony. I pulled out my phone and dialed Nora's number. She picked up on the second ring. Nora, it's me. I know you can't represent Silas anymore. I need to hire you to represent me. There was a brief pause on the line. Represent you in what capacity? As an interested party, I want to file an emergency motion to contest Margot's temporary guardianship. Not on Silas's behalf, but as his father. Is that legally viable? It is, Nora said cautiously. But it doesn't change the evidence problem. To overturn the guardianship, we still have to prove Margot lied to the judge, which means we still need Marcus to recant the affidavit. And you told me Marcus won't budge because she's blackmailing him. I solved the blackmail problem, I said. I have the physical evidence she was holding over his head. Jesus, Nora breathed. You stole it? Marcus gave it to me, I corrected. But here's the catch. I can't use it to threaten Margot directly without risking Marcus. And if Marcus goes down, he won't testify for us anyway. I need to get the guardianship revoked without exposing the gallery's forged documents. You want a legal miracle? Nora said dryly. I want to know if there's an administrative backdoor. How did she get the hearing so fast? She filed the petition this morning and had a signed order by 9:00 a.m. That doesn't happen in Cook County unless you know somebody or unless you bypassed standard notification procedures. Silence over the phone. I could hear Nora typing. Temporary emergency guardianships are often granted ex parte, Nora explained softly, meaning only one side presents their case to the judge because the other side is deemed in immediate danger. But there are strict procedural rules. The petitioner, Margot, has to swear under oath that she made a good faith effort to notify all immediate family members before the hearing. I stopped pacing the kitchen. She didn't notify me. Exactly, Nora said, her voice picking up speed. She couldn't notify you because if you were at the hearing, you would have contested Marcus's affidavit. So she must have lied on the filing. She must have checked the box saying she attempted to contact you and failed, or that your whereabouts were unknown. I've lived at the same address for 12 years, I said, the anger flaring hot in my chest. She sent a medical transport to my house. She obviously knows where I am. If she committed perjury on the procedural filing to get the ex parte hearing, we don't need Marcus to recant, Nora said, the realization clicking into place. We don't even need to argue the facts of the art gallery incident yet. We just file a motion to quash the guardianship based on procedural fraud. If the judge realizes she lied to get in the room, he'll vacate the order immediately. Draft it, I said. How fast can we get in front of the judge? Tomorrow morning, Nora said. I'll file the emergency motion electronically right now, but we need a smoking gun that proves she deliberately concealed the hearing from you while knowing exactly how to reach you. I thought about the timeline. She texted me last night telling me Silas could live in her basement. A text proves she has your number, Nora said. But she could claim she called you this morning about the hearing and you just didn't answer. Wait, Silas said. I turned around. He was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, his phone in his hand. He looked slightly less pale, a small spark of defiance finally cutting through the exhaustion in his eyes. She emailed the gallery at 3:00 a.m. the night she destroyed the painting, Silas said. She told Marcus I was pulling out of the showcase. Did she email anyone else? What do you mean? I asked. Silas walked over to the island and set his phone down. He had his email app open. Duncan, the landlord. When he gave me the eviction notice, he said she formally withdrew as my guarantor. Right, I was there. I just logged into the tenant portal, Silas said, tapping the screen. Duncan uploaded the formal withdrawal notice she sent him. It's a PDF of an email she sent to the property management company. He turned the phone toward me. I read the email. It was exactly what Duncan had said. The tenant at 412 is volatile, pulling my name, inspect the property for chemical damage. Look at the timestamp, Silas said quietly. I looked at the top corner of the email. Sent, Thursday, May 28, 8:15 a.m. She sent this 45 minutes before the guardianship hearing, I said, the pieces falling into place. Keep reading, Silas said. Look at the CC line. I squinted at the small text. Under Duncan's email address, there was a second address copied on the message. It was my email address, but it was misspelled. She had typed first lastignail.com instead of Gmail. She misspelled my email on purpose, I said, a cold smile creeping onto my face. It's a digital paper trail, Nora's voice came through the speakerphone, loud and clear. She intentionally sent the notification to a dead domain. That way she could print the outbox receipt for the judge to prove she attempted to notify you of the erratic behavior and the pending legal action. But she knew the email would bounce. Can you subpoena the IT logs from the property management company to prove she received a bounce-back error? I asked. I don't even need to, Nora said, the thrill of the legal kill in her voice. It's a strict liability standard. If she provided a demonstrably false address to the court as proof of notification, the order is void, ab initio. It's dead from the start. Send me that PDF right now. Silas forwarded the document. I'll see you in court at 9 tomorrow, Nora said, and hung up. I looked at Silas. For the first time in 3 days, the oppressive weight in the room seemed to lift. He wasn't out of the woods. He still had no studio, no money, and a frozen endowment check. But he wasn't going to be locked in a ward, and he wasn't going to be controlled by the woman who set his life on fire. We spent the rest of the evening eating stale takeout and going through the boxes in the garage, checking the wrapped canvases to make sure they hadn't been damaged in the move. It felt like we were finally breathing again. I slept for 4 hours that night. It was the best sleep I'd had all week. At 8:30 a.m. on Friday, Silas and I walked into the Daily Center downtown. The courthouse was a sprawling, brutalist monument to bureaucracy. We took the elevators up to the family division on the 19th floor. Nora was already there, standing outside courtroom 1904 in a sharp navy suit, holding a manila folder. The motion is filed, Nora said, handing me a copy. Judge Durbin is on the bench today. He's the one who signed the original order. He hates being made to look like a fool. If he realizes Margot played him to rubber stamp a fraudulent ex parte hearing, he's going to be furious. We sat on the wooden benches in the gallery, waiting for the docket to be called. At 8:55 a.m., the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Margot walked in. She wasn't alone. She was flanked by a man I recognized instantly, Ellis Brennan, one of the most expensive and ruthless family law attorneys in Chicago. He was the guy you hired when you wanted to completely obliterate the other party. Margot saw us sitting in the gallery. She didn't look angry. She didn't look cornered. She gave me a small, tight, almost pitying smile. My stomach dropped. That wasn't the look of a woman who was about to be caught committing procedural fraud. That was the look of a woman who had already rewritten the rules. They walked past us and took their seats at the respondents' table. Nora frowned, watching Ellis Brennan unpack his briefcase. Brennan doesn't take defensive procedural hearings, she muttered. He's an attack dog. The bailiff called the court to order. Judge Durbin, a severe-looking man with wire-rimmed glasses, took the bench and flipped open the file in front of him. Case number 24FG0912, petition to quash temporary guardianship. Counsel, step forward. Nora stood up and walked to the podium. Good morning, Your Honor. Nora Kellner, representing the petitioner, the father of the ward. We are moving to vacate the temporary emergency guardianship granted yesterday on the grounds of procedural fraud. The respondent deliberately provided a falsified email address to bypass the mandatory notification requirement, denying my client his right to contest the ex parte hearing. Judge Durbin looked down at the paperwork. He frowned. Mr. Brennan, your client stands accused of intentionally deceiving this court to secure an emergency order. Ellis Brennan stood up slowly. He adjusted his cuffs, completely unbothered. Your Honor, my client denies any intentional deception. It was a simple typographical error in a moment of extreme distress regarding her son's safety. Brennan paused, letting the silence hang in the courtroom. However, the point is entirely moot. Nora stiffened next to me. Moot? Yes, Your Honor, Brennan said, pulling a single sheet of paper from his file and handing it to the bailiff to pass to the judge. As of 8 a.m. this morning, my client has voluntarily withdrawn her petition for temporary guardianship. The courtroom was dead silent. I stared at the back of Margot's head. She withdrew? Nora asked, completely caught off guard. Your Honor, this is an attempt to evade a perjury citation. She knew we caught the fake email, so she's dropping the guardianship to avoid sanctions. I am dropping the guardianship, Your Honor, Brennan countered smoothly, because it is no longer medically necessary. Silas Voss's primary care physician evaluated the situation remotely and determined an involuntary hold is not required at this exact moment. Judge Durbin looked at the paper. The guardianship is dissolved. The bank freezes associated with it must be lifted immediately. Mr. Brennan, inform your client that if she files another ex parte motion in my courtroom with a typographical error on the notification line, I will hold her in contempt. Understood, Your Honor, Brennan said smoothly. Motion to quash is dismissed as moot. We're adjourned. Durbin banged his gavel and walked off the bench. It was over in 3 minutes. Nora packed up her briefcase. She looked relieved, but deeply confused. We won, she whispered to me. She backed down. The bank accounts will unfreeze by noon. Silas is legally clear. But as we walked out into the hallway, I didn't feel like we had won. I felt like we had just walked into a trap. Margot and Ellis Brennan were waiting near the elevators. Margot was adjusting her silk scarf, looking perfectly serene. I walked straight up to her. What are you doing, Margot? She looked at me, her eyes entirely devoid of warmth. I'm protecting my son, just like I always have. You dropped the guardianship because you knew I had the email. I dropped the guardianship because it served its purpose, she corrected softly. She stepped a fraction closer, her voice dropping so only Silas and I could hear her. I needed 24 hours of legal control over his accounts. That's all. The accounts are unfrozen, Silas said, his voice tight. I'm calling the bank as soon as we get downstairs. You can't touch that money anymore. Oh, sweetie, Margot sighed, a terrifying, condescending sound. I don't want to touch your $14, and I certainly don't care about the endowment money. She opened her handbag and pulled out a pristine white envelope. She held it out to Silas. He didn't take it. He just stared at it. What did you do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. When you have temporary legal guardianship over an individual, Ellis Brennan stated loudly, stepping in flawlessly as his client's proxy, you have the legal authority to sign legally binding documents on their behalf. Margot smiled. She let the envelope drop. It fluttered to the marble floor, landing perfectly at Silas's feet. I didn't take your money, Silas, Margot said softly. I took your catalog. Silas looked down at the envelope. He bent down slowly, his fingers trembling, and picked it up. He tore open the flap and pulled out a legal document with a gold gold notary seal at the bottom. I read it over his shoulder. It was an exclusive rights and representation agreement, signed by Margot Voss, acting as the legally appointed guardian of Silas Voss. I sold the exclusive commercial rights to every piece of art you have created in the last 3 years, and every piece you will create for the next 10, Margot said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast marble hallway. To an LLC that I own. I filed the contract with the county clerk at 4:00 p.m. yesterday while I still held legal proxy. The blood rushed in my ears. The gallery sabotage, the medical transport, the forged email. None of it was about committing him. None of it was about the $75,000 endowment. It was a smokescreen, a distraction to keep us fighting the immediate threat while she quietly executed the real theft in the background. If you try to sell a single canvas, Silas, Margot said, stepping onto the elevator as the doors slid open. If you try to show your work in any gallery in this city, I will sue you for copyright infringement. You can paint all you want in your father's garage, but you will never make a dime off it unless it goes through me. The elevator doors slid shut. Silas stood frozen in the courthouse hallway, holding the piece of paper that legally reduced him to a ghost in his own career. Nora gently pulled the document from his hand. She didn't say a word for a long time. The only sound was the distant ding of the elevator and the muffled chatter of lawyers negotiating in the alcoves. Her eyes scanned the dense legal boilerplate, darting back and forth across the page. I watched her posture change. The aggressive, upright stance she held in the courtroom slowly deflated. It's airtight, she said, her voice dropping. It's a standard predatory representation contract. She didn't write it herself. Ellis Brennan drafted this. It transfers all commercial rights, intellectual property, and exhibition rights to an entity called Vanguard Arts Management, LLC. Can we find it? I asked. She signed it under a fraudulent guardianship. To prove it was fraudulent, you have to go back to the beginning, Nora said, tapping the paper. You have to prove the initial emergency petition was based on a lie, which means you need Marcus to testify about the gallery, which means you have to use the binder, expose the Ashby forgery, and ruin Marcus. And even if you do all of that, it takes a civil court years to unwind a filed corporate contract. She knows you don't have years. What about the fellowship? Silas asked, staring at the marble floor. The $75,000. Nora checked her watch. The temporary guardianship is officially dissolved. The bank freeze should automatically lift in the system within the hour. The money is yours. She can't touch the cash. But what good is the cash? Silas said, his voice cracking. He finally looked up, and the despair in his eyes was absolute. I can't paint. If I buy a canvas with that money and put paint on it, Vanguard Arts Management owns it. She didn't just take my studio, Dad. She took my hands. I grabbed his shoulder. I squeezed it hard. We are not doing this here. Not in the hallway. We're going to the bank. We're moving that money, and then we're going home to figure it out. We left Nora at the elevator. She promised to run a trace on Vanguard Arts Management, LLC, just to see if there were any structural flaws in the company we could exploit, but her tone didn't inspire confidence. We drove straight to a different bank, not Chase. We walked into a local credit union in the suburbs. The wire from the endowment had cleared the moment the freeze dropped at Chase. Silas sat across from a loan officer named Garrett and executed a cashier's check transfer, moving the entire $75,000 into a high-yield account with only his name on it. Margot didn't know this bank existed, but the victory felt entirely hollow. Silas walked out of the credit union with a debit card linked to 75 grand, and he looked like a man walking to his own execution. When we got back to my house, Silas went straight to the garage. I stayed in the kitchen. I made 2 sandwiches we weren't going to eat. I needed to give him 10 minutes to process, but after 5 minutes, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the sharp, distinctive snapping sound of a heavy-duty box cutter blade locking into place. I dropped the knife on the counter and ran to the garage. Silas was standing in front of his stack of completed canvases, the ones we had carefully wrapped in moving blankets and hauled out of the West Loop at 3 in the morning. He had the box cutter in his hand, his knuckles white. He was staring at a portrait he had spent 4 months painting. Silas, put it down, I said. My voice was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. She wants the catalog, he said, his voice entirely detached. The contract says she gets the commercial rights to everything I've painted in the last 3 years. This is 3 years of work. He raised the blade. If you cut that canvas, you let her win. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. She already won, Silas screamed, the numbness finally shattering. He spun around, pointing the box cutter at the stacked paintings, not at me, but his hand was shaking violently. She owns my name. If I try to put these in a gallery, she serves them with an injunction. If I try to sell them online, she sues the buyer. The only way I can keep her from having them is to turn them into trash. If you destroy them, she'll sue you for destruction of corporate property. I fired back, keeping my tone perfectly level, fighting his chaos with absolute gravity. Think about it, Silas. Vanguard Arts Management holds the commercial rights. If you destroy the inventory, she will take you to civil court and sue you for the lost potential revenue. She will drain that $75,000 endowment in legal fees in 6 months. He froze. The box cutter hovered inches from the tight canvas. He realized I was right. She had built a cage so perfectly designed that even destroying his own work was a punishable offense. He dropped the box cutter. It clattered against the concrete floor. He sank down with it, putting his head in his hands, sitting on the cold garage floor, surrounded by his wrapped life. I have nothing, he whispered. I'm a painter who isn't allowed to paint. I walked over, picked up the box cutter, and put it in my pocket. I sat down on a plastic crate next to him. We worked the problem, I said quietly. We don't panic, we don't destroy. We find the seam. My phone rang in my pocket. I pulled it out. The caller ID said Claire Strand, the foundation director for the Chicago Arts Endowment. I answered it and put it on speaker. Claire, are you calling about the wire transfer? Silas moved the funds to a new account this afternoon. I'm not calling about the wire, Claire said. Her voice was strained, polished administrative warmth entirely stripped away. I'm calling because our legal department just received a demand letter from Ellis Brennan, representing Vanguard Arts Management, LLC. Silas looked up, his eyes bloodshot. A demand letter for what? I asked. For the painting, Claire said. Erosion of support. The ruined canvas Silas exhibited at the gala. As you know, the fellowship comes with an agreement that the endowment retains the physical winning piece for our permanent collection in the lobby of our headquarters. It's a standard part of the award. We know, I said. Margot Voss is asserting that the endowment endowment does not have the legal right to take possession of the piece, Claire explained, sounding thoroughly exhausted. She provided a copy of an exclusive rights contract signed during a period of legal guardianship. She is claiming that Vanguard Arts Management owns the physical asset and all exhibition rights. She is demanding we surrender the canvas to her immediately, or she will file an injunction against the foundation. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline. Margot wasn't just locking Silas out of his future. She was actively dismantling his one remaining victory. She wanted the ruined painting. She wanted to take the symbol of his defiance, the canvas she had destroyed that he had turned into a masterpiece, and she wanted to lock it in a storage unit where no one would ever see it again. Where's the painting right now? I asked. It's still at Marcus's gallery, Claire said. Our transport team was scheduled to pick it up on Monday morning to bring it to our archivists. Margot's lawyers sent the letter to us and a separate notice to Marcus, warning him that if he releases the painting to the endowment, she will name his gallery as a co-defendant in a theft of property suit. Marcus, again. What is Marcus doing? Silas asked, leaning closer to the phone. He's panicking, Claire said bluntly. I just got off the phone with him. He's terrified of a lawsuit. He told me he's boxing the canvas up this afternoon and holding it in his secure vault until a judge tells him who legally owns it. He's washing his hands of it. Margot was boxing us in from every side. She was using Marcus's fear to paralyze the gallery, and she was using the LLC to paralyze the endowment. Claire, I said, choosing my words very carefully. If the endowment gets tied up in a title dispute over the physical painting, does that affect Silas's fellowship money? There was a long silence on the line. The fellowship requires the delivery of the winning piece, Claire said softly. If Silas cannot legally deliver clear title to the painting within 60 days, the board will have no choice but to demand the $75,000 back for breach of contract. She hung up. The silence in the garage was absolute. The $75,000 sitting in the new credit union account wasn't a lifeline. It was a loan with a 60-day ticking clock. Margot hadn't just stolen his future. She had engineered a scenario where Silas would be forced to pay her back for his own victory. She wants the painting, Silas said, staring at the concrete wall. She wants to force you to default on the endowment, I corrected. If you can't hand over erosion of support, you lose the money. If you give it to her, you lose the money. The only way you keep the fellowship is if the endowment takes undisputed possession, which they can't do because Marcus is locking it in his vault, Silas said, his voice rising in panic. And Marcus won't release it because she threatened him with a lawsuit. I stood up. I looked at the boxes of paints, the wrapped canvases, the life my son had built that was currently paralyzed by a piece of paper. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the blue binder, the Ashby ledgers, the proof of Marcus's forged import documents. Dad, Silas said, his eyes widening. Nora said if you use that, you burn Marcus. If you burn Marcus, we lose the only witness who can prove she destroyed the studio. We don't need to prove she destroyed the studio anymore, I said, staring at the blue spine of the binder. She voluntarily withdrew the guardianship. We aren't fighting her in family court anymore. We're fighting her in corporate law. But what does burning Marcus do? I'm not going to burn him, I said, putting the binder under my arm. I'm going to trade with him. I left Silas in the garage and drove back into the city. The Friday afternoon traffic was thick, crawling along I-290 like a sluggish river. I had an hour to think about exactly how I was going to play this. Marcus was a coward, but he was a survivor. He responded to leverage. Margot had leverage over him, but her leverage was a bluff. She didn't have the binder. I did. I parked in an alley behind the gallery. The loading dock doors were shut. I walked around to the front. The gallery was open, but quiet. The post-lunch lull. Dana was sitting at the reception desk, typing on her laptop. She looked up as the bell chimed. He's in the back, Dana said immediately, not even waiting for me to ask. She looked pale. He's been screaming at his lawyer for 20 minutes. He told me to lock the front doors at 4. It was 3:15. I need 5 minutes with him, I said. Dana just nodded and went back to typing. She was entirely done with the collateral damage of this war. I walked down the narrow, fluorescent-lit hallway past the bathrooms. The door to Marcus's office was closed. I didn't knock. I pushed it open and stepped inside. Marcus was standing behind his desk, holding a roll of bubble wrap and a tape gun. On the large viewing table in the center of the office lay Erosion of Support. The canvas was off its stretcher bars, laying flat, the harsh, violent smears of dissolved oil paint and turpentine looking even more chaotic under the harsh office lights. He was preparing to roll it up and hide it in the vault. He dropped the tape gun when he saw me. Get out, Marcus said, his voice cracking. I am not doing this with you today. I am legally embargoing this piece until Ellis Brennan and the endowment's lawyers figure out who owns it. I closed the door behind me and locked it. I pulled the blue binder out from under my arm and tossed it onto the glass surface of his desk. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud. Marcus stared at it. He looked like he was going to be sick. I'm not here to argue about the law, Marcus, I said, walking slowly over to the viewing table. I looked down at Silas's painting. I'm here to make a transaction. You're extorting me, Marcus hissed, backing away from the desk. You're doing exactly what she did. She didn't have the binder, I corrected quietly. She had a folder with nothing in it, and she bluffed you into committing perjury. I have the actual physical evidence of your federal crime. That's not extortion. That's a negotiation. What do you want? He asked, his voice trembling. I pointed at the ruined canvas on the table. I want that painting. Marcus shook his head frantically. I can't. You know I can't. She sent me a legal notice. If I release it to you or Silas, Vanguard Arts Management will sue my gallery into oblivion. They won't sue you, I said, because you aren't going to give it to me, and you aren't going to give it to Silas. You're going to call a private courier right now, and you are going to ship it directly to Claire Strand at the Chicago Arts Endowment. It's the same thing, Marcus yelled, gripping the edge of his desk. If it leaves this building, she sues me. If it doesn't leave this building in the next 10 minutes, I said, taking a step toward him, I will walk out of here, drive to the FBI field office on Roosevelt Road, and hand this binder to a federal agent. Margot is threatening you with a civil lawsuit that will take 2 years and cost you money. I am threatening you with federal prison by sundown. I let the silence hang in the air. I let him feel the absolute weight of the choice. Marcus looked at the canvas. He looked at the binder. He was sweating heavily now, large drops pooling at his temples. He was a man trapped between two rapidly closing walls. If I ship it, Marcus whispered, his voice broken, she ruins my reputation. She tells every collector in Chicago I can't be trusted with chain of title. If you don't ship it, I said, my voice dropping to a dead, flat calm, you won't have a reputation to protect because because you'll be answering to the Department of Justice for trafficking stolen cultural property. He closed his eyes. He stood there for a long time, his chest heaving. Then he reached over to his desk phone and hit a speed dial button. Dana, Marcus said into the speaker, his voice utterly defeated. Call Swift Logistics. Tell them we need a direct insured art transport to the Chicago Arts Endowment headquarters. Right now. He hung up. He looked at me. Take the binder. Not yet, I said. I'll take the binder when the courier walks out the front door with the canvas. We stood in the office in agonizing silence for 20 minutes. Neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the HVAC unit and the distant noise of traffic from the street outside. Finally, there was a knock on the door. Dana opened it. Behind her was a guy in a blue uniform with a large, flat cardboard art crate. Marcus didn't say a word. He just pointed to the table. The courier carefully lifted the canvas, placed it inside the crate, sealed it, and handed Marcus a digital tablet to sign. Marcus signed it blindly. The courier took the crate, thanked him, and walked out. The painting was gone. It was in transit to the endowment. Margot's leverage over the fellowship money was gone. I picked up the blue binder from the desk. You're a dead man, Marcus said quietly, not looking at me. He was staring at the empty viewing table. You understand that, right? She's going to find out I shipped it to Claire. She's going to realize you forced my hand. She doesn't stop. She just reloads. I know, I said. I walked out of the gallery. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the concrete. I got into my truck and locked the doors. I pulled my phone out and texted Silas. The painting is secured. The endowment is safe. I didn't wait for a reply. I put the truck in gear and started the drive back to the suburbs. I felt a fleeting sense of triumph, a brief, clean high of knowing I had outmaneuvered her. I had protected the $75,000. I had protected his fellowship. I was halfway home when my phone rang. I glanced at the dashboard screen. It wasn't Silas. It wasn't Nora. It wasn't Claire. It was Duncan, Silas's landlord. I frowned. We had cleared the loft completely. We had moved everything out before the 48-hour eviction window expired. There was no reason for him to be calling. I hit answer on the steering wheel control. Duncan, we're fully vacated. I left the keys in the drop box. I know you did, Duncan said. His voice didn't have the bored, bureaucratic drone it usually did. He sounded tense, on edge. I'm standing in the unit right now. Then what's the problem? The problem, Duncan said slowly, is that you didn't take everything. I switched lanes, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. We took every canvas, every easel, every box of paint. The place is completely empty. It's not, Duncan said. I could hear a strange echo over the phone, the sound of his voice bouncing off the bare concrete walls of the massive loft. You left the installation piece? Installation piece? I repeated, my brain scrambling. Silas is a painter. He doesn't do installations. We took everything off the walls. You didn't take the back wall, Duncan said. I felt a cold prickle of unease at the base of my neck. What are you talking about? I came in to do the final walkthrough and assess the floor damage from the turpentine, Duncan explained, his voice tight. But the floor isn't the issue anymore. Someone came into the unit after you dropped the keys. Someone painted the back wall. Painted it with what? I don't know. It looks like, I don't know what it is, but it's massive. And it's signed. Signed by who? I demanded, hitting the accelerator. Signed by Silas Voss, Duncan said. And I have a problem, because an hour ago, I got a registered letter from a company called Vanguard Arts Management. My blood turned to ice. They claim, Duncan continued, that the mural painted on the structural wall of my building is the exclusive commercial property of their LLC, created by their contracted artist, Silas Voss. They are threatening to sue me for destruction of corporate property if I attempt to paint over it, remove the drywall, or alter it in any way. She didn't stop. She just reloaded. She had used the keys we surrendered. She had gone into the empty loft, hired someone, or done it herself, to paint a mural on the load-bearing wall of a commercial warehouse, forged his signature, and then legally embargoed the building. She trapped the real estate, I whispered, the sheer scale of the malice finally locking into place. She didn't just trap the real estate, Duncan said, his voice dropping into a register of genuine fear. You need to get here right now. You need to see what she painted on my wall. I drove back into the city with the windows down, the cold May air cutting through the cab. Duncan was standing at the freight elevator when I pulled up. He didn't say anything. He just held the gate open. We rode up in silence, the grating rattling its familiar complaint. When the doors slid open on the 4th floor, I smelled it immediately. Not turpentine this time. Something older, something organic and earthy, linseed oil and raw pigment. The door to Unit 412 was already open. I walked in. The loft was completely bare. Our boxes, our easels, the carefully wrapped canvases, all of it was gone, exactly as we'd left it. Bare concrete floor, exposed ductwork overhead, the faint ghost of chemical stains near the drain where the turpentine had pooled 2 mornings ago. But the back wall was not the back wall I remembered. It was floor to ceiling, every inch of it, roughly 12 feet high and 30 feet wide, occupying the entire north face of the building, painted in a single brutal continuous image that stopped my breath completely. It was Silas, not an abstract suggestion of him, a perfect hyper-realistic portrait, painted with the kind of desperate precision that took weeks, not hours. He was sitting on a concrete floor, this concrete floor, his back against a wall, his knees drawn to his chest, his head bowed, paint-stained hands, a ring of dissolved canvases surrounding him like a wreath of ash. Above him, tall and centered, a woman in a yellow coat stood with her back to the viewer, faceless, featureless, but radiantly lit from a light source only she could access. At the bottom of the image, in Silas's unmistakable handwriting, the cramped, left-leaning scrawl I had watched fill sketchbooks for 20 years, were 3 words in cadmium white. He needed me. Duncan was standing behind my left shoulder. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. She hadn't painted a mural. She had painted a biography, a permanent, load-bearing, legally embargoed declaration that her version of events was the only one that would outlast us. She had put her narrative directly into the architecture of the building. Even if we won in court, even if every judge in Cook County ruled in Silas's favor, this image would stand in this warehouse for as long as the building stood. Anyone who walked through that freight elevator would see it. Collectors, critics, the next generation of artists who would lease these units. He needed me. I took a photograph, then another. I walked the length of the wall slowly, documenting every inch. My hands were steady. My chest was not. On the drive home, I called Nora. She painted a mural on the wall of his former studio, I said. Signed his name assigned to it, filed a corporate claim on it through Vanguard. There was a pause. To trap the real estate? To do more than that? I said. To own the story? Another pause. What do you want to do? I thought about it for a long time. Long enough that the city dissolved into the flat, dark suburbs stretching toward the lake. Long enough that the streetlights blurred and the world narrowed down to just the white line of the highway ahead of me. Nothing, I said. Tonight, nothing. I'm going home. Silas was in the garage when I pulled in. He had dragged the folding chair in front of the blank canvas I'd propped against the workbench 3 days ago. He was just sitting there, not touching it, not looking away from it either. A brush stroke of burnt umber was drying on the back of his left hand. He must have reached for something out of habit and stopped himself. I didn't tell him about the mural yet. I sat down on the crate next to him. We looked at the blank canvas together. The painting made it to Claire, I said. The fellowship is safe. The money is yours. He nodded slowly. He already knew. He'd read my text. And the contract? He asked. Still standing, I said. Nora's looking for the seam. We'll find it. He didn't answer. He just looked at the brushstroke on the back of his hand. He rubbed it with his thumb, spreading the umber into a smear. She'll come at us again, he said. It wasn't a question. She will, I agreed. He was quiet for a while. Then, very carefully, he reached forward and picked up a brush. He turned it over in his fingers, feeling the weight of it, looking at the bristles. He didn't dip it in anything. He just held it. She wants me to stop, he said. I know. She wants the blank canvas to stay blank. He looked at it. That's what she's always wanted. Everything else. The guardianship, the contract, the mural. It's all just architecture around the blank canvas. I said nothing. He was right, and he didn't need me to confirm it. He set the brush down across the lip of the palette. He stood up, stretched his back, and walked to the door that led into the house. I'm going to sleep, he said. Good, I said. He paused in the doorway. He didn't turn around. Dad, yeah. She painted me sitting down. A beat of silence. She made a mistake. He went inside. I stayed in the garage for a long time after that. The single fluorescent tube overhead buzzed and flickered at the edges. The blank canvas sat there, patient and enormous, waiting. I reached over and turned off the light. Tomorrow, he was going to paint.